We are apparently live,
Maybe.
which is fun. We are here. This is the Rotten Horror Picture Show special Friday the 13th, Friday the 13th
Teach.
coverage, a special edition live stream because we've been covering the Friday the 13th series on Patreon. And since this is Friday the 13th, it was an actual Friday the 13th, we wanted to do something special. And it happened to be in August, which we had just finished part 8. So we have just finished the original 8 of the Paramount series before it goes over to New Line Cinema and things get really weird.
Because they haven't gotten weird yet?
No. Telekinetic father murdering children and landlocked lake trips to Manhattan via boat are not weird enough. Sewer child Jason's is not weird enough. But yeah, so we're going to take a little time to talk about what we've covered so far and take a look back on the 8 films of the Friday the 13th series. And I would like to welcome everyone by saying, hello. My name is Clay. With me as always is Amanda. How are you doing, Amanda?
I mean, before you did that, I was fine.
Yeah.
Now I'm
well. I hope I can annoy you less by showing off my new shirt that I got just for this occasion.
I love it.
I'm a big fan of deep cut T-shirts, and this is one of the combined deepest cuts I think I've ever seen. It's a Jason Takes Manhattan shirt, and it's also kind of a Monster Squad shirt. So I appreciate that
because I have the Monster Squad shirt.
Yes.
So we could have matched. I should have worn my Stephen King Rules T-shirt.
Yeah, that might have been a little strange, but
yeah, it would have been weird.
Yeah, we this is Friday the 13th. You know, I think there should always be a Friday the 13th in August. I don't know how you make that happen, but I think it should always be that way because you know how Thanksgiving ends up being like the kickoff of the Christmas season? I feel like a Friday the 13th in August would be a great kickoff to the Halloween season.
Okay.
And so then, all of September, you can get all spooky. You can go to your Spirit Halloween store and get, whatever animatronics.
As though people like you and I need an excuse to do that anyway.
That's true. But, you gotta make sure the rest of the world knows it. But anyway.
The normies.
So, as I mentioned, we've covered, so far on Patreon, we've covered Friday the 13th, Part 1 through Part 8. They're all available right now at the Patreon at patreon.com/thepensky file. And one of the things that we talked about going into this was I was never a big fan of this series. I always kind of thought it sucked. So I wanted to use this as a just to really watch through things and maybe reevaluate things, see if things had changed. And I know you came into it as more of a fan, right?
I mean, I had only seen a couple of them, but the ones I'd seen, I had enjoyed them for what they are. I think.
Yeah. So this is your first like full watch through?
Yes.
So how has your opinion of the series, your view of the series changed at all since we've watched through in a fairly short period of time all 8 of these classic films?
I think they're both better and worse than I thought, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had kind of thought that everybody was exaggerating a lot when they talked about how shitty some of these were.
Yeah.
So, on the one hand, I had the expectation from general popular opinion that these are bad movies. So it's like, all right, all of these are going to suck. All of these are going to be garbage after like 2. Yeah. But on the other hand, everybody had talked them down so much that when there were good moments, I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. So. It's a really interesting series to me because I think your headspace matters a lot when you go into these because
yeah.
I would say like of the 8 movies we've watched, only like 2 of them, maybe 3 are real movies. The rest of them are like barely movies. They're just sort of like a series of vignettes smushed together, linked by. It's like Magnolia, but instead of frogs raining from the sky, it's a undead zombie monster killing people.
Yeah, I think one of the ways my perception has changed watching all of these is just that they're not horror movies as much as I thought they would be.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of always assumed they would be like gorier or more intense or more frightening. And instead, there's a lot more silliness than I was expecting, or a lot more kind of like moments where it's just sort of like plotting or boring or just repetitive. Like, I didn't expect so many recaps.
Yes, they kill a lot of time telling you what happened in the previous movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The thing that kind of stood out to me too as we've been going through these, because in the grand scheme of the classic 80s, well, I guess I don't know if I would call Halloween an 80s slasher. Let's just for the sake of argument say that it is. The classic slasher franchises, your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th, and your Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street is the one that skews more comedic generally. Like there's it's not quite as serious. It gets sillier as it goes quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Halloween is fairly dead serious.
Yep.
If you go back and you think about those movies, the first one is dead serious. The second one's pretty dead serious. The third one, while different, is still pretty serious.
Yep. It treats it very seriously, even though it's a silly ass concept.
Yes. Yeah. 4, 5, and 6. I mean, it's tough. Donald Pleasance does a lot of heavy lifting in those movies, making them serious because he is incredibly serious. So it's difficult to not be when he's on screen. And then once Rob Zombie takes over, all of the fun gets sucked out of them.
Oh yeah, it's just completely like a slog in those ones.
Yeah, and but Friday the 13th has this kind of interesting place in the middle where it is fairly I don't know if I would call it campy. Would you call it campy? But there seems to be a lot more lightness built into this series than I think I had anticipated.
Yeah, I feel like you could make an argument for in 6 and 7 and maybe a little bit of 8 that there's some camp. Less so in 8. I think 6 because 6 is the one. That's
technically there's camps in the first 6, 7, and then 8 he's on a boat. So you can pay for this. You can pay for this if you want on Patreon.
Oh God, save me. No, yeah, but like I remember 6 is a little bit of like a wannabe James Dean car movie, and like they're just always driving around town like trying to outrun the sheriff, Yeah.
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 And it's really goofy. Like 6 obviously is the one where things get funny and the tone swings like a pendulum from side to side.
Yeah, that's the thing with this series is that, like, overall, it's really inconsistent tonally.
Mm-hmm. Do you find them scary? Do you find the Friday the 13th movie scary at all?
I found the first one scary when I first watched it, like, especially when I was younger. Even I would say, like on later rewatches, there are moments of really good, like, tension and suspense that kind of can get you if you're, like, let yourself sink into it.
Yeah.
I guess the second one has a couple moments that are like similar, but after that, no.
Yeah.
Not really at all.
Yeah. I think the first 2 have some pretty legitimately scary stuff in it.
Yeah.
RX2 mentioned there's a Friday the 13th series. Yes, there's actually 2 technically. Because there's the series of movies, and also there's Friday the 13th, the television show, which we will not be covering.
Darn.
Yeah, well, hey, there's only 12 movies in this series. We might have to think of something else to do when the year rolls over. True. What the hell was I talking about before?
Tone,
yes. The first 2 have a lot of pretty legitimately scary stuff in it, like the sense of tension in the first one's really good. And the final sequence in part 2 is really great.
Yeah.
2 is the first one where it really kind of takes a long time for things to get going, but once it does, it's kind of like pushing a boulder down the hill. It just keeps going. And the later movies do that. They try to do that as well, and I think some of them succeed better than others.
Many of them fail.
Yeah, a lot of them just feel like it's kind of killing time until Jason shows up, and it's not super fun. But yeah, they're not. I would say like maybe half of them have a couple legitimately scary scenes in them. But yeah, it is a lot more kind of light than I was expecting this time around. And it's the first time I really paid attention to how they were doing everything. And yeah, there's some creep factor. I would say there's more creep factor than there is scares in these movies.
Yeah, of like Jason just kind of stalking around creep factor.
Yes. Yeah. And like
Also,
like in part
teenage
4,
boys being creeps.
oh yes, there's a lot of that. Yes,
There's a lot of that.
like in part 4, the opening of part 4, where they're in the morgue, and there's two creeps in that one because there's the doctor creep who's creeping on the nurse.
Dr. Creep and Jason Creep.
Yes, and Jason Creep.
Yeah.
That pays off pretty well. The scene in part 6 where he's outside the window stalking the girl is really fun.
Oh yeah.
So every couple movies has, or even if you want to get into some of the scary stuff, when Jason in part 7, when he kills the girl in the sleeping bag, that's pretty legitimately scary because of the way it's cut. It's very abrupt. It's very violent.
Yeah, but that one's a difficult one because it's scarier in practice the way they cut it than I think it is in theory.
It is
like
it is pretty goofy, but the way that they cut it is very effective.
Right, exactly. Like if you had not watched part 7 along with us and seen the sleeping bag kill, you'd be like, that sounds dumb. That sounds kind of boring. Like he gets a girl in the sleeping bag and whacks her against a tree.
Yeah.
The end. But it's cut in this way that's like, ooh.
Yeah. So I think they all have their spots. My general opinion has changed where I think I like this more than I did before. Because as I said, I used to be very negative on the Friday the 13th movies, and now very firmly the Halloween series has taken the bottom spot for me.
Hey.
I don't. If we get there, we'll get there, and we can have that argument. But
and we will, and we do.
For my money, I've really enjoyed this so far. I've been really enjoying these movies. I'm appreciating Jason as the character, the pop culture monster that he is, more than I had in the past. I still don't think I like him as much as Freddy. I'm always been a Freddy guy. I always thought the Freddy movies are more just generally interesting, because that's the other thing with this series is, like, as fun as they are, especially if we've been watching one of these a month since the beginning of the year.
It's the dawn of time.
And it's more or less the same exact thing every time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the
unless
challenge.
Roy shows up.
Unless fucking Roy. That's the challenge with these movies for me, is like, even prepping for tonight, I was going back through my notes and I was just like, all right, okay, I got one. I got part 1 down. I know what part 1 is. I got part 2 down. Part 3 is the barn. Part 4 is Tommy as a kid. Like you have to find some distinguishing characteristic to keep them straight in your head, because if you start looking more closely at the beats of the plot, like 2 through 5 are nearly identical in a lot of ways.
Which is so funny because they give you recaps at the beginning of all of them, and the recaps don't really help, because all the recaps do is just show you all the ways that he's killed people, or people have been killed up to this point.
I wonder, do you feel like the recaps are maybe more like a psychological thing, like a build up for the audience, and less of a here's what has happened, you need to keep up?
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's like an opening act kind of.
Yeah.
I was actually watching, while I was working today, I was watching part 4, and that opening recap of part 4 is real. It's really long, but it's actually really well done, because they take the campfire speech from part 2, when they huddle everybody around. He's like, I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason. Right. And then he tells the whole story and whatnot. They used that. Bonds. Yes. Yeah. They used that campfire speech as a framing device to give you basically a best of up to this point of him killing everybody. So it's like a hype video. So you've got the guy talking about this urban legend of the killer who lives in the woods while they're showing you the greatest hits of him killing people for the past
It's
3 movies.
it's Jason's highlight reel that he
Yeah.
brings to like auditions and shit.
Yeah, yeah. If you go onto Vimeo and you look up his demo reel, it's just that opening of part 5. Oh, sorry, part 4. But one of the things that the recaps are always bring to the forefront of my mind is the timeline of these movies, which
Oh my god.
we've kind of been trying to reconcile as we've been watching them, but it's kind of impossible to do.
If
from
someone could explain it to me, I would be eternally grateful because I cannot like what are we but by part 8, what are we in the year like 2024 or something insane?
I think if you go by literal timeline, I think we are definitely in the 2000s. The movie came out in 89, but if you want to track the timeline, because the first one was 79, and then the second one I think is a handful of months, maybe like 5 years later. I think it's 5 years later.
yeah, and
So,
then 3 is directly after 2. It's like right away.
3 and 4 are both directly, like immediately after part 2. So
Okay.
part 2 technically takes place in 1985, I think, or 1984.
Okay.
And so parts 2, 3, and 4 all take place in 1984.
Yes.
Then we follow Tommy Jarvis into adulthood, which is at least 10 years later. So part 5 takes place probably in like 1993.
Yeah.
And then after that, indeterminate amount of time. So we're in the mid 90s
Right.
by part 6.
Yes.
And then part 7 gets really confusing because it picks up where part 6 ended with a little girl, and then we jump into the future where
Probably
this little
at
girl
least
is
like 10 years, right?
yeah, probably another 10 years, which puts us like in the early 2000s.
It's 2003.
And then part 8 is undetermined when that takes place, but either way, we are well into the 2000s at this point. Do you have a way that you've figured out to reconcile? Does it matter to you that the timeline is so screwy? Do you think about it at all, or is it just something you kind of like, whatever?
So I think some of the movies force you to think about it because they explicitly bring it up.
Yeah.
And I think because the first like 5 movies are so clear about where they are in like relation to one another chronologically, that when like part 6 happens, you can't help but count forward. You know,
Mhm,
do you know what I mean? Like it's tough because it's so explicit for so long. And then at some point they just go, well, fuck it, who cares? And
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to drop it all of a sudden like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the way that I have kind of like galaxy brained the timeline is I prefer, and this will kind of go into the next thing we talk about, I think. My favorite kind of Jason is Jason who's more of a urban legend. Like I think that's the way that these movies are set up. Like I was saying in that opening for part 4, he's literally a campfire story, right? He's the boogeyman that the camp counselors scare the kids with. And so I think if you think of each movie as just sort of like a campfire story and kind of ignore the literal timeline of it all, I think it's a lot easier to deal with. So like in part 7, like I said, part 7 takes place directly after the end of part 6, or who knows how long after. But if you're going in the timeline, it's like the early 2000s, even though the movie came out in 1988 or whatever. If you think of it as someone telling you a story of, oh, there was this girl who lived on the lake and Jason was chained up in the water, and when she used her telekinesis, she freed Jason, who came back and started killing everybody again. I think it's easier to reconcile that stuff, and I think for me anyway, it fits the vibe of the series to treat it more as individual, kind of like, oh, I heard that story, but you know what else I heard? I heard about the time that the Jarvis family went to the lake, and then Jason showed up and killed Crispin Glover.
Yeah. Just like we've all been asking him to do for years.
Yeah.
You know, I like that interpretation. I like that way of looking at it, but I think that the movies themselves kind of resist that.
Yeah.
Because
it's tough. They put part in front of the first 8 movies, so it's really difficult.
Right. So you're kind of encouraged to look at them sequentially and try to put it together. And there's movies where it is this sort of explicit like urban legend that's like mixed with truth that's passed on like oral tradition style word of mouth sitting around the campfire for
Hmm.
several of them. But then in some of them, there's like newspaper clippings and there's like TV news talking about it, and the sheriff being like, Jason Voorhees is dead, and like, Jason's grave's right over there.
Yeah,
So it all
yeah.
kind of very like specifically puts it in time, which makes it hard to just be like, let's just treat this like the ever evolving urban legend.
Yeah, it always the thing that pushes back against that. Well, I guess it depends on how you look at the movies, because if you're looking at them as not necessarily literal, then I think anything goes. So like,
Yeah.
oh, have you heard the story about the boy Tommy Jarvis who dug up Jason Voorhees' body? If you're listening to that being told around a campfire, I don't think you're going to go, where the fuck did they get Jason's body? Who buried him? Who paid for the burial? Like that.
Right.
That stuff doesn't matter. It's like, oh, that's where Jason's buried. And
Yeah.
one night somebody went to dig him up,
Yeah.
and it ended up bringing him back to life and starting a killing spree again.
No, I wish these movies had leaned more into that kind of vibe. Instead, they sort of went for the more like, well, we have to take him to the morgue now and we have to process him at the hospital, and it's
Yeah.
like too realistic.
Yeah, see, that feeds into my theory that the cops know what's going on, and there's
They're in on
something
it.
I happening that they're not talking
The
about.
cabin in the woods scenario.
One of our listeners here, Stephen Jimenez, says, I never was a Friday the 13th fan, but Michael Myers has my attention.
Same.
If we end up covering the Halloween series, that's going to be interesting to talk about, because I kind of think of the Halloween series as like Black Sabbath, where they were the first to do it and they were arguably the best to do it. And then they kind of fell out of vogue for a while. And by the time they came back, they had to sort of figure out how to fit into the new genre they helped create but had changed so much. So, you've got your Black Sabbath albums in the mid 80s are chasing all of the other 80s heavy metal stuff. And it never quite works as well. And that's kind of how I feel about Halloween, because after the first two is being generous, but
Come on,
after the first
3 is
two,
fun.
3 doesn't really count. If we're really going to be talking about Halloween, 3 doesn't really count as far as if we're talking about Michael Myers, 3 doesn't count.
Okay, fair.
But
fair,
like 4, 5, and 6, I just have our listener Kyle, who sent us some questions, was mentioned how he thinks part 4 of both series, Halloween and Friday the 13th, are the best ones. And I just can't do it, because the mask in Halloween part 4, part 5, part 6, Resurrection, everything until the 2018 one, the mask is awful. And if you don't nail that mask, I think the whole character falls apart, at least for me.
Yeah, I don't think the whole character falls apart, but I get what you're saying. I get where you're coming from on that. It's kind of rough for a while there.
Yeah.
In terms of like, how can you be scared of this person in his like extremely plastic?
He looks
horrible.
so goofy. Yeah. Steven also says, realistically thinking, Jason Voorhees isn't believable because he got hurt so many times and never dies. And I think that's a good place to jump off for the next thing I want to talk about, which is, do you have we've watched every incarnation of Jason up to this point.
Yes.
He's gone from Mountain Man to kind of unkillable Mountain Man with a hockey mask to literal zombie, to zombie plus, to mutant toxic waste monster.
Yeah.
Do you have what kind of Jason do you like? Do you prefer more realistic, or do you prefer the more supernatural, or somewhere in between? Or Roy. Roy is also an answer if you really want to say Roy.
No, Roy is never an answer. Roy is not a valid response in my opinion.
His son was killed, Amanda. His son. That we had no idea what was his son until the end of the movie, when they had to end the movie.
Yeah. So I would say, I would say part 7 Jason's probably my favorite Jason. Just like visually he looks
Yeah.
the coolest in my opinion. I think we've talked a lot because is that the first Kane Hodder one?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the first Kane Hodder one.
I think we talked a bit in our coverage about how he playing Jason really brings something new and something necessary to that character that gives some sort of, I don't know if I would say, I mean, I guess you could say personality. It's not he's more, I don't know. Like we've talked about a lot.
I would go out on the limb to say he brings a performance. I don't think a lot of the other Jasons really have a performance. I think they're just kind of clearly stuntmen and masks for a lot of them.
Yeah. I do have a weird affection for part 2 Jason because I think there's something pathetic and kind of almost funny about him, but he's still scary somehow at the same time, which is kind of impressive to do all that at once.
The bag does a lot of work. The
bag does a lot of work.
Impeccably clean bag that he has for some reason.
Oh, doesn't he have like a very clean outfit? Isn't that one of your many problems with early Jason is that he's very well dressed and
that's my biggest problem with Jason up through part 6 is that his clothes are way too clean.
Yeah.
He looks like he just stepped out of like Rennie's or something and just bought a new set of Carhartt overalls and a nice flannel.
He was at the Tractor Supply Depot and went nuts. What about you? Which Jason's your favorite?
7 is also my favorite. I think he's my favorite visually. If I had to rank them, and I know this is kind of a cheap ranking, but 7's my favorite. My number 2 is actually the dream version of part 5, where Tommy is seeing visions of Jason who are not Roy, they're actually Jason. I think that Jason looks really good. He's kind of like grimed up and has kind of a good look to him.
Okay.
Part 6, part 8, even though Slimy Jason is a hit or miss, but I think they photograph him really well in that. So he's got a really good look.
Slimy Jason doesn't do it for me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Part 4, part 2, and part 3 is probably my least favorite. The first hockey mask one never. I understand how important it is iconography wise, but I don't know. I never really liked the way he looks.
Yeah.
But as far as like the performance, I agree. I think 7 is the best. 7, Kane Hodder brings a real physicality and like his movements are very deliberate. He's clearly thought through how he's going to do this, and I don't want to drag the other guys saying that they didn't put any thought into this, but it seems to me like Kane Hodder really thought about how he was going to do this and how the physicality of Jason was going to look instead of. And I like the Jason who is just more deliberate, who isn't running around and isn't just a guy in the woods in a mask. I prefer. Oddly enough, part 7's my favorite, but I think I prefer Jason, kind of somewhere in the middle as far as whether or not he is just a guy or if he is some sort of supernatural monster. But I think that also kind of puts him in Michael Myers territory quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm happy.
I would go more supernatural if I had to choose a direction.
Yeah, I would skew more supernatural. I had this idea a while ago as we were going through these. I was thinking about it, and I was like, I like the idea that in the comic books, Swamp Thing. Stay with me. Swamp Thing isn't.
Jason.
Yeah, Swamp Thing isn't a guy who turned into who he's not a guy who turned into a swamp monster. He is the living embodiment of the swamp who thinks it's human. And so I kind of like that. Something similar about that for Jason, where he's sort of like the living embodiment of the trauma and horror at Crystal Lake. So when things whatever it is about that area, whenever something happens there, whenever someone trespasses, the lake tulpas this thing into existence, which believes itself to be Jason Voorhees, the little boy who drowned.
Yeah, it's like a double mask. There's the hockey mask, and then there's the Jason mask, and then there's the actual thing behind it.
Yeah, like he's the literal spirit of the lake in this forest kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I lean more towards that kind of interpretation. I think I enjoy that angle more than like we're gonna somehow try to explain how this human dude just keeps coming back. That doesn't seem interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheesy Libs has informed us that Freddy versus Jason is the best Jason.
Oh.
We haven't covered it yet. We'll be getting there pretty soon. That is what, August, September. That'll be in November, I believe. We'll be getting to that. But I always liked that Jason. I think pitting him with Freddy is a really good move, and I think they end up using him in a way that makes sense. Because Jason is, we talked about this a bit when we covered Part 6, where Part 6 is the first time they bring kids to the camp.
Yes.
And it makes sense. Yeah. You're like, oh man, if there's kids there, then that just means everything gets that much more dangerous. But then we realized it doesn't, because Jason would never kill a child. Jason is himself a child who was murdered or allowed to die. That's his whole thing, is like he's born of this child neglect.
Yeah. Yeah, and his whole thing is targeting teenagers. He kind of kills older adults who get in his way, but his big pet peeve is like these teens on my lawn kind of vibe. Like,
he's mad because he never got to go to high school is what he's mad about.
And make out with someone. Yeah.
Well, he gets to do that in Freddy versus Jason as well. Sort of, not really. But now
I'm not sure. I was like, I'm looking forward to Freddy versus Jason. Like, somebody's saying he's the best Jason. That's going to be cool to see. And now you're telling me things that I don't need to see.
But the Jason in that movie is they put him in Freddy versus Jason. They put him in a good spot where he's kind of a pawn in Freddy's game. And he's a little bit more mindless than Freddy, but he's not entirely mindless. Like, he eventually kind of gets his own agency back. And you can imagine where it goes from there.
Teen murder.
Teen murder, yes. Yeah. Or Freddy murder, depending on how angry he is.
There you go.
Do you have a favorite kill from the first 8 that we've watched?
This was a hard question because there are some really good ones, and I do love the sort of classic camp bunk bed kill. I have like just a general affection for that, but I think I have to say that my favorite kill is the sauna kill.
Oh yeah, interesting. Part 8. Ooh, yeah, well, wow.
It's so creative.
Yeah,
like it's really, really surprising. The way they did it. It looks pretty good. The way they did it.
It does.
Like,
yeah.
For such a low budget movie that kind of skimps on a lot of other things, it came out really well, and I think that's my favorite.
Yeah,
I'm standing by it.
Yeah,
I like a good sauna and a good murder.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing with some of these movies is I think the way they end up cutting them because of the MPAA regulations or whatever end up doing the ones that seem like they might be the most hampered end up being enhanced by the way that they cut. Because that sauna kill looks really good, and like I said, my favorite kill is the sleeping bag kill. It's probably an easy one to pick.
Yeah.
But it's so brutal. It's like if you want to distill Kane Hodder as Jason down to a single moment, I think it's the sleeping bag kill from Part 7. I also have a special place in my heart for the heart punch from Part 7, which I also really like.
Yeah, that one's good. That was good. I feel like there was another one in 8 that I was actually pretty impressed with, but I can't remember what it was. I'll have to...
The guitar one would have been good.
Yeah.
But they cut it too much. It's all off camera, so it's not really that much fun. We have a question from Kyle who was not able to join us this evening, and I want to let everyone know we will be ranking these movies, but I'm going to save that till the end. I think it's going to be fairly controversial, but we are going to do that. Our first question from Kyle is, I guess this is specifically for Amanda.
Oh no!
Which Friday the 13th film has the most sensual Jason? If anyone wants to know the context of that, when we covered Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Amanda told the world that she believes that Leatherface is the most sensual of the slasher killers.
I stand by that.
And Kyle would like to know which of the Jasons lives up to that criteria for you.
All right, so I called Leatherface sensual in like the literal meaning of it, like he's very grounded in the physical world. He's very like willing to get his hands dirty. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He's not kind of doing the Jason thing, just like teleporting back and forth. And
he lives on a farm. He's making his own food.
Yeah, he's butchering some chickens. He's cooking in the kitchen.
Probably
he's dragging
enjoys
somebody out the door.
Probably enjoys a candle.
Yeah.
Every now and then,
Yeah,
nice
nice
scented
bubble
candle.
bath. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to pick the most sensual Jason because he is so not of this world.
Yes.
I feel like in terms of performance, I would probably go with our fave Kane Hodder because, like we said, I think the word you use that's very apt is physicality.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think
Kane Hodder's Jason is the one where it's like when he gets you in his arms, you just want him to hold you.
But I would also kind of argue that part two Jason.
I was thinking part 2 as well. Yeah, I'm not totally sure why.
Well, I think it's because that is like the Jason as just some guy.
Yeah.
So he is like, you see him running through the woods and he like trips on a branch or he has to like kind of dodge around the car to get to you.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just more like trapped in the physical plane with the rest of us as opposed to later Jason who can kind of just pop up and appear wherever he wants.
If you want to get really creepy about it, part 3
oh no
part 3, lest we forget, is the movie where they kind of imply that Jason may have sexually assaulted somebody, which is not the most sensual of activities, but it's the only time anything close to sexuality is pushed into the series from Jason's standpoint.
No, personally, I think that DQs him from all consideration. Yep. No
from
felons,
all,
please.
Yeah. Cheesy Lib says that all the kills in part 3 are cool with the old school 3D. I will agree with that.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
We were lucky enough to watch part 3 in 3D when we covered it because I have one of the 3D televisions that they sold when people stopped buying them, so I got it pretty cheap. So it was fun to see that in 3D. Another question from Kyle. This is about the series as a whole. If you take a step back and try to look on it with fresh eyes, is Friday the 13th a good title for the series? The films don't all seem to take place on this date. Actually, very few of them do. Or at least it's barely relevant if they do, and it feels fairly generic and nonspecific for a horror series. Is this a problem, or has the series taken sufficient ownership over the superstitious phrase? What do you think?
So this is interesting. I appreciate this question because I think it goes back to what we were talking about with the chronology, because for all my talk of how like there are all these things that they talk about in the movies and the newspapers and all this, I completely forgot to mention that, like Friday the 13th is itself a day.
Yes. Yeah.
That, like happens in some years and doesn't happen in others. And therefore it kind of does force you even more to think about timelines. I think when people think of Friday the 13th, like the title, they typically are only thinking about the original one. Maybe they're thinking about the second one.
Interesting. Yeah.
And those ones, I mean, the original is pretty explicitly on Friday the 13th.
Mrs. Voorhees says that Friday the 13th is Jason's birthday. Yeah, so they link it even more explicitly than just it being the name of the day. It's specifically Jason's birthday.
It's Jason Day.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is an interesting question still, because it after like the part 2, nobody's really thinking about that. Like it's never really brought up again that on like Friday the 13th explicitly and only is when Jason comes back. Like that doesn't seem to have anything to do with how he works as a monster. So yeah, but I also don't know what you'd call these movies instead. I
think the original, I think one of the original titles was like Camp Blood or something like that, or I think there might have been a more generic term where it was like "Don't stay the whole weekend" or something like that.
I do think it's smart. It was smart of them to have latched on to this like phrase and the superstition because it's memorable. Like like lots of people know the sort of, Friday the 13th is a bad luck day.
Yeah, I would argue, I mean, it started out none of the creators would hide this fact. It started out as just a ripoff of Halloween.
Right.
And as I kind of said earlier, Friday the 13th is like the second spookiest day of the year. So if you're going to rip off Halloween, why not go with Friday the 13th? And it feels kind of like, a band that starts off as a copy of another band, but then eventually finds their own way where, like the Bee Gees were the Beatles from Australia until they started playing disco. And now when you think about the Bee Gees, you think, oh, they're the kings of disco. Right. I think at this point, what may have started off as sort of like we need a creepy sounding day to copy Halloween. Mm-hmm. I think these movies have more ownership over that day than the Halloween movies have over Halloween, because Halloween encompasses so many things at this point.
Yeah.
So many pop culture things. Friday the 13th is made up of exactly one pop culture element, and it's these movies.
Right. The actual day of Halloween is like, it's like an oversaturated market. There's so many, the same way there are a million Christmas movies, there are a million Halloween movies.
Yeah. Do the Halloween movies all take place on Halloween? The second one definitely doesn't, because the second one is the next night, I think, or it might be the same night actually. So maybe it does still take place on Halloween.
Yeah, it might technically, but
We'll get into the Halloween timeline if we end up covering the movies. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not get too far off track. We have so much to talk about with Jason.
Yes. But it's I think they own the day at this point.
Yeah.
In a way that the Halloween movies don't.
It was a smart marketing ploy, even if it's not accurately reflecting the content of the movies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think I was trying to think about it. I think it's part 1 is on Friday the 13th. The second one is on the 14th. I think the third one is like maybe 5 years later, but I don't remember. Then the next 4 is like the next day. And so, rarely do they end up actually on Friday the 13th. When they eventually do another Friday the 13th film, if they ever do, I hope they do, because you know what kills me? There's 12 goddamn movies. The little amount of sensitivity I have to that sort of neatness drives me insane. It's like those videos where the person makes the really nice cutout and then just goes through the middle at the end and screws it up, and you just kind of twitch. That's how I feel when I think about the Friday the 13th series, because there's 12 of them.
Yeah.
All they need is to make one more. They don't have to ever make another one again if they don't want to.
And just think of the ways you could play with the title.
Friday the 13th.
Part
13. I don't know. When they eventually do another Friday the 13th film, do you think they could do it with Pamela Voorhees as the killer again, or some other twist? Can Jason ever be put back in the bottle despite not being the killer in the original? I would have to say he cannot, because he is the one linked to the day at this point. Even though he's not the killer in the first one, he is ever present. The idea of Jason Voorhees is ever present, and it's his birthday. You can't take that away from him. But yeah, when we get to the remake, it's going to be interesting, because have you seen the remake from 2009?
Nope.
No,
I'm completely a blank slate from here on out.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
The guys who wrote Freddy vs. Jason, I believe, wrote the remake, and what they do really well in Freddy vs. Jason is they strip away all the other bullshit, and they kind of figure out what works about the two characters, and then they put them together and they make it work. And so when they were tasked to do this remake, they basically had to figure out how to get all of the elements that are recognizable about the Friday the 13th series into a single movie, which includes Pamela Voorhees, which includes Jason with a bag on his head, which includes Jason in a hockey mask. So they had to figure out how to jam all that stuff. It's basically, the remake is kind of like the first 4 movies kind of jumbled up and jammed together into one new thing. It's kind of interesting. I don't know if it's 100%. I don't know if it 100% works, but it is pretty interesting. What do you think? Cool. Do you think they could do one without Jason? I think they tried once and it didn't go very well.
Yeah, I think it's tough because you start to get into that realm of like, if you have it not be explicitly him, it's like the power of Jason, or Jason possessing somebody, or Jason forcing somebody to do something.
I'm going to stop you right there, and let's say we'll revisit that next month, but continue.
Okay, all right. I think we've both agreed that we like some of the supernatural elements, but I also don't want Jason to become purely divorced from the physical plane and become something like, like the Tooth Fairy, or like, you know what I mean? Where it's just this like, this totally incorporeal thing.
I'm trying so hard not to say anything because I cannot wait for you to watch Jason Goes to Hell.
Spoiler. I think if you got somebody who's like actually a really good writer, you could probably do it. I just think it would be very difficult at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a tough sell.
Yeah, I which is too bad, because I do think that there would be, like, again, with somebody who's a really good writer, I think there would be some creative directions you could go off into. But at this point, yeah, I think it would just be like, kind of, especially after the wait for a new Friday the 13th for so long, I think people would feel really ripped off if you didn't actually have Jason show up.
Yeah, I think when you get to, this is the 5th movie in 5 years, maybe you want to try something different. But when it's been 12 years since the last time he's been on screen, and before that it was like 6 years, and after it's been a lot of time.
Yeah, especially since it'll be even more than 12 years if they ever make another one.
Yeah. I hope the lawsuit's over and they're just sitting on the 13th movie and they're going to release it on the 13th anniversary of the last one. But
what if they're sitting on the 13th movie and they're going to destroy it just to spite you, Clay?
I have respect for that. I feel like the news
spite move, you'd be like, okay, I respect
spite is amazing. You know, so many people make their entire careers off of spite, and it's a very intense motivator. I am comfortable with the concept of of a new Friday the 13th movie being kind of like the Mayan calendar prophecy, where it's like, nope, it's gonna happen. 2012 is when it's gonna happen. 2012 comes and goes. Well, we actually, you know what happened? We looked at the calendar wrong. It's actually 2016. 2016 is when it's going to happen. Nope, doesn't happen then. Well, obviously, our Spanish is not very good, so we have to go back and look at it again.
Yeah, this also sounds like one of those doomsday cults where they keep promising that the rapture is coming, and it just keeps
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I think it is at this point with Friday the 13th movies. Meredith says they need to talk to the Fast and Furious people to figure out how to get the 13 in the title.
There you go.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, how do you do that if the 13 is already in the title? You
just call it Friday.
Well, that's a whole other franchise, and that just gets confusing.
Damn it.
F13 parentheses 13, maybe? I don't know.
I can't. I'm not creative enough.
The I in Friday is a 1. And the E in the is a 3. There we go. Okay. So you've got, it's like 7, but with the 1 and the 3 baked into the, okay. All right. Okay. That's bulletproof.
Yeah.
We kind of covered this already. Is Jason scarier as a supernatural entity or as a mere man capable of shocking depravity? I guess we didn't talk about whether or not he's scarier in those two ways. But again, it sort of comes back to the fact that, I don't know, these movies aren't necessarily scary, you know?
Yeah. If I'm gonna, just take that question at face value and try to answer it as directly as I can, I would say he's scarier as some sort of supernatural entity. I think, because I think you can see in the movies where he is more just kind of a guy, like we were saying, there's scary moments in part 2. There's great suspense moments.
Mm-hmm.
There are also moments where I was literally laughing at like Jason like kind of trotting through the woods in the background to like hurry to catch up. Where it's kind of just like, yeah, he's just some weird guy who lives in the woods. Like, get a gun, shoot him. I don't know.
Yeah, there's some real like scream moments in the early ones.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison. Even though
where
like,
someone like hits him with a 2x4 and he rolls down a hill or something.
Yeah, and he gets up and he looks all dazed and yeah. Whereas later on, when he's this sort of like teleporting force of nature, it's much more frightening because you cannot escape him. Like, he's going to find you. He's going to come after you.
Yeah. I think 7 is the sweet spot. 8, they have him jumping around too much. He's too teleporty.
It's because he's so slimy. He just
can't get your hands on him.
Yeah, there's no
He's
grip.
like a prized hog at a county fair. What is it about the fourth films? This is from Kyle. What is it about the fourth films in horror franchises that make them so good? Both Friday the 13th Part 4 and Halloween 4 are the best in their respective series. I will also add, a lot of people consider Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 to be one of the better ones. I don't know if it's considered to be the best, but it is considered to be a better one. I will go first and say that I don't know, because I don't believe that the fourth movies of either of those series are the best one.
So again, like I don't necessarily agree either, but again, I will try to answer this question as directly as possible. I think part of it might have to do with the fact that, like, all right, if you've gotten to 4 movies, if you've gotten at least that far, the first one was good enough that it got enough of a fan base that there's enough people who want to keep watching these movies, right? So you know you're starting off with something. Something about the concept, something about the killer, whatever it is, in especially these like slasher movies. I think the second movie is usually just trying to duplicate the success of the first as closely as it can.
Yeah.
And typically I think the third one is where everybody tries to do something kind of different, and it's usually not great.
Yeah. Nightmare on Elm Street actually kind of inverts that a bit, because part two of Nightmare on Elm Street is it's pretty weird. Like, they hadn't bolted down any of the rules yet, so it's kind of all over the place. And part 3 of Nightmare is generally considered, this is where they figure everything out.
Okay.
But generally, I would agree with you that yeah, by the time they get to 3, they're kind of like messing with the formula a little bit.
Right, and so I wonder if in these cases, in the part 4, it's sort of like you figured out the things you can mess with without pissing off your fan base. So you go back to sort of brass tacks and the necessary things that you need to keep your core fans happy. But then you figure out other little ways that are slightly more creative, I think, to play around. Like, specifically thinking about for the Friday the 13th movies, in the fourth one is when we get an actual child in the mix for the first time. And I know we talked a little while ago about how, like, Jason would never kill a kid. He was a murdered kid. Who would do such a thing? I would argue in 4, you're not quite so sure of that.
Yeah, I would agree. Watching it today, I thought the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, you actually feel like Tommy's in real danger and he might not make it. And I think that adds a certain level of, like, tension. And so, I think they hit on the right level of, like, deviation from the first one, but not going, like, way off into weird, we'll put Jason on a boat for 55 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in both series, in Halloween and Friday the 13th, the part 3s are divergent, like you're saying, but for different reasons. Halloween 3, obviously, famously, is the one without Michael Myers. And so part 4, I feel like if you're coming to the show for Michael Myers, him coming back is going to obviously boost that up.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not his mask looks like ass. Part 3 of Friday the 13th is the 3D one. It's the gimmick movie.
Right.
And within that movie, on top of just the gimmick, is clearly they don't know what else to do.
Oh
because
yeah.
that's the one that
Yeah.
starts with like a 15-minute sequence of a guy walking around a general store.
Yeah, like eating some of his own produce and putting it back and like
Yeah.
playing with the bunny rabbit. It's really
Yeah,
weird.
there's this weird the main character has this weird subplot or personal trauma where she may or may not have been assaulted by Jason. When we talked about part 3, that's one of my favorite episodes we've done
Oh,
because
really?
we spent basically the whole time seeing the movie that was in there that they didn't
Oh
make.
yeah.
Because there were like relationships between characters, and we were like,
Mhm.
that girl should be the hero, and she should be in love with that other girl. That's way more interesting than any of the shit that they did in this movie.
Yeah, we do have a tendency to try to rewrite the movies the way we want them.
Well, these ones are interesting because like these movies are so. When I said earlier, a lot of them feel like they're barely movies, and so
Yeah.
what that means is there's so much space. These are not dense by any means.
Yeah.
And so there's so much space with these characters they're giving you that, you and I both have the same tendency, I think, to find those crevices and be like, ooh, what's going on in there? And so a movie like Friday the 13th Part 3, which has, if Part 1 had good characters, Part 2 has okay characters, Part 3 is like, well, how do we do Part 1 and Part 2? And you end up with a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox.
Yep.
And so they're just trying to do the fun stuff with this gimmick on top, but they've got some interesting potential stories that they're not telling, which end up just being this like dead space that could have been more interesting. And so when Part 4 rolls around, I think it's a back to basics thing, and I think that's probably what works about Halloween 4 as well to a certain extent. It is more of a back to basics kind of thing where it's like, all right, Michael Myers is back. He's involved. He's going after someone in his family.
Yep.
This time it's a kid. That's scary, right? Let's give him a dog shit mask and put it on film.
You just can't stop. Can't stop yourself, can you?
Meredith said my main critique of the movies, Jason wasn't nearly as scary to me as Michael Myers or Freddy. And Cheesy Lib says Freddy is definitely top tier scare for me. Jason and Michael Myers joint second. Yeah, I've always been a Freddy guy. I think because the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, I find them scarier because they are in your head more. Like there's more. It's supernatural, but like what they're getting at is the dream realm, which is. I've always been fascinated by that. Dreams have always interested me. And it takes an external force and turns it into an internal force, where it's not someone who's chasing you down. It's, he's already in your head. You can't run away from this. If you fall asleep, you are dead.
I wonder if the reason Freddy doesn't really work. So I enjoy Freddy. I will absolutely agree that conceptually scarier than Michael Myers and Jason. But I am not as scared of Freddy. And I wonder if it's because I am a person who has actual night terrors.
Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah.
So I'm just kind of like, yeah, whatever. That's Tuesday. What's your problem?
Right.
This happens to me all the time. Horrible things pressing me down into the bed and I can't move. Yeah.
Yeah, that probably goes a long way. Yes.
Yeah, it becomes a little more mundane than like terrifying teleporting man in mask will not stop stalking me and has been killing all my friends.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. I've seen I not to put you on the spot. Do you think I feel like
To say let's fight.
I feel like women tend to gravitate towards the slasher genre a lot, and I don't know if you had any theories about why that might be. It's like the same kind of thing as like the serial killer genre, where there's
Some would refer to that as true crime.
True
but
crime.
I
Excuse me, true crime. Yes, that's what I meant. I meant true crime more than just serial killer. You know what I mean though. There seems to be a big fan base that is female more so than I think you would generally expect. Do you have any thoughts as to why that might be?
I mean, I think a lot of people have talked about this probably much more eloquently than I can, and with more like factual research to back it up. But I think a lot of women kind of treat it almost as like like it makes you think of like the real life scenarios that could happen
Sure.
to you and like what you
Sure.
might do during them or like what to watch out for, especially in the case of true crime. And I know as a true crime fan myself and knowing a lot of other women and like zero men who are also into true crime, they do talk about it as a way to like work through their anxieties about
Sure.
those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. And I also think it's just that like with horror movies, it's fun to be scared.
Right. Right.
And some of this stuff might be more scary for women than it is for some men. So if you're watching horror movies because you enjoy being scared, you're going to watch the things that scare you.
Right. Right.
Which would make sense why more women might gravitate towards like masked man with a knife, because that's more frightening for a lot of women because that's like a real life possibility in some cases.
I have thought about that where it's like, do I gravitate more towards Freddy because statistically a man in a mask stalking me to kill me and assault me is not high on the list of things to be afraid of as you know, as big a dude as I am.
Yeah, no, let me tell you, it changes things when an actual man has actually in your real life tried to force his way into your apartment.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
So yeah, you look at these things very differently where you start being like, I don't know, I think I get like hyper judgy of the final girls and I get super like, that's a dumb move. Like no real woman would do that. A real woman would do this. Like
oh, we didn't talk about the final girls yet, did we?
No.
I don't think we did. Before we get there, Meredith says there's no escape from Freddy and lack of sleep messes you up. Michael Myers is great at stalking people slowly and relentlessly. Jason just pops out with his hilarious creative ways to kill. He is Jason does feel like it's tough because
he's like the art kid of the slasher killers where he's just like the weird theater kid who's been like making, you know,
I think Freddy's the theater kid.
Freddy's the theater kid. Okay. And then Jason's more like the kid who's making like sculptures out of broken bottles and does interpretive dance in front of them.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's so interesting to me because like they made 4 Friday the 13th movies before they made the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like there is a clear influence on the Friday series after Nightmare starts. Because I think Jason starts getting more inventive and things start skewing more supernatural after part 4.
Yeah, they do. They definitely do. Sorry,
and
I just saw what Meredith said.
Jason is the jock. I would agree with that.
That's probably right.
I would say Freddy's the theater kid, Jason is a jock, and Michael Myers is the quiet kid.
He's
quiet
the weird
goth
kid who writes poetry and tries to slip it into your locker without anyone seeing.
Yeah, he's the one who stands across the hall and just stares at you for a while. And in his head, there's like a Smith song playing, but to you, it's just creepy. But yeah, I
like that we just cast the Breakfast Club with
basically. If you were to cast
murderers,
if you were to cast the Breakfast Club, I guess Jason would be Emilio Estevez. Would Freddy be?
He'd be Ducky.
Well, I was going to say, would Michael Myers be? What is her name? Who's the goth in that movie?
Oh, the weirdo.
Yeah.
Oh God, what is her name? Help us, please.
I guess that would be Michael Myers. And then would that make Freddy Judd Nelson, or would Jason be Judd Nelson?
I don't know. I think we're going too far down this.
Yeah. There's too many. There needs to be only 3 people in the cast for us in order to do this correctly. Ali Sheedy. Thank you, Meredith.
Sheedy. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to me because Freddy is traditionally known as the one who is most creative due to his magical powers. Michael Myers, more of a brute force kind of guy. Jason is this weird kind of mix in the middle where he's definitely brute force, but he likes to have a good time. You know, he's like a mullet where he's like business in the front, party in the back. And so he's going to kill you.
Mullet.
He's going to kill you in a brutal way. Like he might throw you through a plate glass window. But then, because he likes to have fun, he might position you in a doorway. So when your other friend is running out, he opens the door and scares you a second time. So he likes to get kind of creative with it.
Yeah, just pile you up in a room for your friend to find while she's petting a cat.
How would you? So we have on the show been giving the Final Girls point ratings because
yes,
we must objectify them in any way possible. Do you have a favorite? We listed the highest ranked one that we have is Ginny from Part 2 with a solid 8. The lowest we gave was Tommy from Part 5 with a stone cold 0. And we renamed our list. Originally, our list was the Billy from Society to Laurie Strode scale, 1 to 10 scale. And we renamed it to the Tommy from Part 5 to Laurie Strode scale.
Yes.
Regardless of number ranking that we've done, do you have a favorite and a least favorite? I guess Tommy is probably our least favorite. Unanimously.
Yeah. Yeah, Part 5 Tommy is just so bad. Like, I was tempted to say Rennie from Part 8 is my least favorite.
Oh, she's rough.
But then I remembered Part 5 Tommy, and it was just like, oh, not again. Like, I don't think... I think, you know what? I think I could rewatch almost any of these movies if someone was like, oh, you've been watching those? I'd love to, like, see some of the weird ones in the middle. Let's watch one. I would just veto Part 5. I would just be like, no.
Interesting.
Never. It's just... bleh.
That's going to be fun when we talk about the ranking because I didn't rank it very high. I didn't rank it high, but I had a really tough time figuring out where to put it. So that'll be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to that because I have a similar story. But in terms of favorite final girl, I think I have to go Ginny.
Yeah,
I think she's just like, not only is she like smart and like takes steps to try to save herself that are like good steps. She feels like a real character because she does, she
uses psychology,
which I love. Like I love that. I love that. Like she thinks on her feet really well, which is impressive. But she feels like a real character too. Like aside from like the sort of like final girl sequence, like she feels like she has like a real relationship with the guy she's dating where like, they're kind of like, there's some tension there. They're not like totally on the same page. They're like, they butt heads a little bit. And like, she has a sense of humor. She has like goals and things she wants to do in her life that aren't just like, stop being sad because my dad was dead. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I like her personality as well as her abilities as a final girl.
Yeah. Ginny is my favorite as well. For all those same reasons. My runner up is actually let me hold on, just pull it up here. Is actually Megan from Part 6. The female lead from Part 6, because she has the most like forward character of all of them. Like they all tend to be like slightly wallflowery, not as much as I think traditionally people assume that final girls in these movies tend to be. But like similarly to Ginny, she is fairly outgoing. She's got that car. She's walking right up to Tommy, who's in a fucking jail cell, and flirting with him to piss her dad off.
Yeah, she's like, "Hey, baby, let's get out of here."
Yeah, she's being proactive when it comes to dealing with Jason. I thought she was a really good character that I wish they had centered the movie on her instead of Tommy, because I think Tommy's garbage.
That was very convincing. I was really skeptical when you said it, and then when you described it, I was like, "Oh, all right, you've converted me. I get it."
The other thing that I've found really interesting watching through these is, I feel like Friday the 13th has become like the original has become like the template for the slasher movie boom that came, like sort of the Black Sabbath analogy, where they started it in the 70s or late 60s, but it wasn't until the 80s when heavy metal really kind of took off with like Judas Priest and all these bands who whatever. And Friday the 13th is sort of the kickoff of the 80s horror boom. And from, I think, all of the tropes and cliches end up getting lumped onto Friday the 13th when it comes down to the concept of the final girl who's the virgin, and you can't have sex or do drugs, otherwise you get killed. And one of the things that it actually has shown up in our Star Trek coverage too, that Wes and I do on the Penske File Star Trek show, is when we were covering the original series Star Trek episodes, I found Captain Kirk to be a much more considered character than he's traditionally known to be, because at this point he's known as like, oh, he's the horny captain who's going to like punch you and then try to sleep with the green girl.
Yep.
And while that is true, it's not untrue. He's also a much better character. He that's not all he does. He is a very thoughtful character, maybe not the way someone like Captain Picard is or something, but
sure.
He is not what the popular cliches have built him up to be. And I said on that show, Chris Pine in the new movies is what is the popular idea of what Captain Kirk is, if that makes sense. So like they didn't, And watching these movies, I've found it really interesting how a lot of the tropes and cliches that are lumped onto this series in genre, these movies kind of undercut them. Like they are still there to a certain point, but like take Ginny, for instance. The final girl in part 2 is someone who has a relationship. She very clearly has sex. She goes out to a bar and goes drinking with her friends. She's not hitting all of these. She's not a wallflower. She's not hitting all of these cliche tropes of what final girls tend to be. And even in the first one, Alice is sleeping with the guy who's running the camp. It's, and I don't think. And the other thing I noticed too, I watched part 2 and part 4 today while I was working. There's the one girl in part 2 who wants to sleep with the wheelchair guy. They never have sex, but both of them get killed.
Yeah.
And
pretty brutally, if I remember correctly.
There is the girl, however, in part 4 who is the wallflower, who does eventually have sex with the guy. She's the one where he's in the shower and he says, he says, I'm in heaven. And then she just pauses and looks back and goes, I think I'm in love.
Oh, yeah.
And then she very quickly after that gets like punched through a window.
Yep.
But even there, it's not, I mean, I guess you could probably chalk that one up to, she had sex, so she had to die. But it is, I do find it interesting how those tropes are not as black and white as I think popular culture would have you believe.
Excuse me. It is interesting because, like you said, those kinds of things do tend to get attributed to movies like Friday the 13th, but they don't actually make those value judgments.
Right.
Like, it's kind of just everybody's going to get killed except one girl.
Right, yeah.
Like, or maybe 2 people, or maybe a girl and a kid. Like, but pretty much everyone's going to get killed. And it doesn't matter so much what they've been doing beforehand. Like, I do think the later movies, or maybe I shouldn't say later, maybe I should say like the middle sequence kind of tends to make some of the background characters shittier so that when they get killed, you're kind of like, oh yeah, like fuck that creepy doctor. He was such a creep. Like, glad he got killed. And that makes it so that like you're, as the audience, is kind of putting the value judgment on it. Like, bad person gets killed, hooray. But yeah, I don't think these movies actually do that. Like, the virgin is the only one who gets to live. I don't think they ever like kind of explicitly take that stance at any point.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And they do. The one thing I think we both latched onto pretty quickly is we've talked about this a few times on the show. Sean Cunningham has said the secret to a successful slasher movie is to have a bunch of characters who are so terrible that you can't wait to see them get killed. And we pretty quickly realized that that's not the case, because when you go by that metric, you've got a movie full of people you just don't like watching on screen.
Yeah.
And
makes for kind of a miserable viewing experience.
Yeah, like part 5 is a lot of that, where like everybody in part 5 is just like miserable. Like those two greasers who are like their car breaks down on the side of the road, and then they're just like yelling at each other, "Start the fucking car, get off my fucking back!" Like you just, you can't wait for them to be killed because you want the scene to be over.
Right, yeah. That's kind of the trick of it. Is it's not like, it's like I just want to get away from these characters. Like that's why I want them to be killed, is so that we can just be done with them and move on.
Yeah, and the difference is that you need a character, and we talked about this in part 7. You don't need a terrible person. You need a heel. You need someone who is a character who does bad things, but you want to keep watching. Yes. And so
our friend the prom queen or whoever.
Yes. My favorite character in the entire series. Yes. Melissa from part 7.
Yes, the rich bitch character.
Best character in the entire series. But yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to see how these movies have kind of not entirely lined up with what their popular culture understanding is. It's kind of like how you have a famous movie quote that eventually gets misquoted, and the misquote becomes the quote.
Yeah,
like, Luke, I am your father.
I am your father. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. Kyle's final question for us. Watching through the films for the first time, I was disappointed in most of the ways Jason met his end in the finales of many of the films. Whether it's him being pulled underwater by Tina's resurrected abusive father, still the weirdest ending of any of these movies.
God, it's so bad.
Or turned back into a kid and left in a New York City sewer. Excuse me. That's the weirdest ending of any of these movies. Can you think of a new inventive way to end Jason's reign of terror? With an important part of his character being his unstoppableness, how do you satisfyingly take him out for good, or at least until the next sequel?
That's a tough question.
That is a tough question.
You know, I will actually argue for, I kind of like the, which one is it? I kind of like the part 6 ending.
I think that's my favorite way that they take him out. Yeah.
Right. Where Tommy gets him back to the lake in some bizarre convoluted plan, but gets him back. That he just
makes up. Yeah.
Yeah. Like spur of the moment. This is going to work.
Yeah.
But he gets him back to the lake, and he goes out on the boat, and he kind of lures Jason into the water, and there's like the fire everywhere, but he pretty much like tethers him down and traps him in the lake. And I think that one works for me because nobody's tactical
Zayla Marie says tactical nuke. It didn't work in Return of the Living Dead. I don't know if it would work in this.
But the lake ending the first time works for me because it's not. It kind of implies like he's dead, but it makes sense then when they bring him back.
Right.
Like there's a certain like internal logic to it. Like he died originally in his real life in the lake, so dying again in the lake kind of is like, okay, I can get it that this has some sort of spiritual hold over him. In terms of like a new inventive way of ending him, I don't know if it's like one of those like, just trap him in some sort of, I don't know,
because you kind of have to make the call as to whether or not he's human or supernatural, right? Because
because if you're just like, we locked him in a coffin and we buried it 300 feet underground, it's like, but if he's supernatural, he can just teleport out of that, so who cares?
Or like I think the funny thing about it is they're so inconsistent. He's so inconsistent movie to movie that even the way that they end in each film is very inconsistent. Like part 2, I don't even know if he's dead or what happens, because Ginny chops him in the shoulder, and then at the end he busts through a window to grab her for that final jump scare, but then she wakes up and he's nowhere to be seen. So I don't know, did that happen? Did it not happen? We don't know what happened.
We don't know.
In part 3, I think he just gets axed when he gets hanged in part 3 in the barn, I think.
Yeah. Doesn't he like outside the barn kind of?
Yes. Yeah. He gets hanged in the barn. Which, like, okay, if he's a human, that'll do it. But if he's not, then it's kind of underwhelming. Part 4, he gets the half of his head chopped off, which is very satisfying. Yeah, by a child who, I guess, using some of the psychology element, shaves his head to look like him.
Look, we had child psychology, and now we have child psychology.
Yes, I've always found that to be baffling as to why he does that. However, I will say, if you were trying to kill me, and you did come down the stairs and get my attention, and I turned around and you had glasses and a beard, then I would probably stop long enough for you to chop me in the head with a machete, because I would be very confused. So maybe it works.
I'm gonna keep that in mind.
Yeah, write it down.
Play with beard on.
But like it's cool, but he's already been chopped in the shoulder and he's already been hanged, and it's like, well, that's clearly not enough to do it. And then part 6, he's a literal zombie that comes back and they drown him. So I don't know. You kind of have to make some sort of decision as to what is going to work and what isn't going to work, and also how what's the word? How recoverable is this injury? You know what I mean? Because like if you if you run him through like a meat grinder, and then you got to figure out how do we bring him back in the next one. It's like, well, I guess
pieces of ground meat crawling together to form back into a guy.
Is it like Monster Squad where it's not a silver bullet, so even if you blow up the Wolfman, all of his legs come back together and stuff? I don't know. It's a tough call because, I feel like they tend to skew either kind of mundane or kind of over the top. So.
Yeah,
so,
that's
on the one hand,
I think the lake one works for me, because I think like visually they make it over the top with the fire on top of the water.
Yeah.
But like, there's like an internal logic, and the idea that he's like just being like trapped down there, and the right stimuli is gonna like wake him back up and bring him back. Kind of like you can work with that.
Yeah.
It's not. He's not so irrevocably destroyed that when we have the next Friday the 13th movie, it's like, oh, really? Well, how is he supposed to come back from being, shot into space and then incinerated? Like,
yeah. I always like it. I like it when it's a death where it's like, it's impressive, but it's also like, it's basically, you're not killing him. You're just shutting him down for a while. Right.
Yeah. It's more like putting him in sleep mode.
Yes. Meredith on the same page as me. Take it from the Monster Squad dad. When they talk about a horror movie, he says something like, if they blew him up, put his head in a blender, and mailed the pieces to Norway, he'd still come back. Yeah, I don't know. It's worth a shot. I think we've hit the last. Ooh, we have Zaylan Maru says, time travel, prevent him from drowning as a child. It's the one thing they've never tried.
Wow.
I would like to see, though, like the skewed timeline of that, though, where preventing him from drowning ends up creating a worse future where they go back to Crystal Lake and it's filled with serial killers. It's not just the one.
It just becomes one of the Terminator sequels.
Yes. But yeah, I think we may as well round this out. We don't have any more questions. If you have any questions in the comments, we'd be happy to answer them. Meredith points out, Jason Takes Manhattan had a lot of Titanic parallels. Freeze him in an iceberg.
I like it.
One of those.
It kind of sticks with the water theme.
Yeah, and also Jason Takes Manhattan shows that in this incarnation, Crystal Lake is like in the Pacific Northwest. So there's probably...
But also attached to like New York City.
Somehow.
I don't know.
It's a lake that's attached to a seaport, which is somehow attached to New York City.
Okay.
But yeah, I figure why don't we round it out by rating these movies? We've watched 8 of them. Now it's time to really go to bat for them in a way that you prefer to do it. I originally said let's rank them worst to best.
Okay.
But I quickly realized using the terms worst and best denoted some sort of like quantifiable quality, and I think that's really difficult to do with these movies because I don't know if I can quantify any of them as being like great or
and sometimes it's hard to justify some of our more some of our feelings of the more squishy ones in the middle there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Which is why I wanted to do least favorite to favorite, only to justify this insane ranking that I've given them. So I figure I may as well steal this from another show. We can list them off, and then when we both have mentioned it, then we can talk about it a little bit. So like if I say part 5 and you say part 6 and then I say part 6, then we can talk about part 6 a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So my least favorite.
Your least favorite.
Part 8.
Also part 8. I had a really tough time placing part 8 because part of me really enjoys the New York part, and I like the way Jason looks. I think he's the one of the better, if not the best, photographed Jason. But everything, the hour it takes, it's the long. We talk about this on the show. Yeah. It's the longest movie.
It feels like the longest movie.
And the time it takes them to get to New York is literally the length of most of the other movies. So you watch an entire movie, just to get to 15 minutes of New York at the end, which I do enjoy, regardless of the insane ending. But so it was tough. But thinking about it in the context of everything, I had to put it at the bottom because it's the characters are garbage.
Yep.
You know, I mean, aside from the pen, Stephen King's pen from high school.
Yeah, it's just like, it's funny because I know I said earlier that if I had to skip one of these, I would skip rewatching part 5.
Yeah.
But there was something about part 8 that I was just like, the whole movie, I was so ready for it to be over.
Sure.
I didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't understand any of their relationships to one another. Like do you know what I mean? Like the people who seemed like they were supposed to be romantic leads had no chemistry. The people who were like, these two girls are supposed to be best friends. It's like, but why? Well, like one of them seems like she really sucks.
Even the pen thing was like in service of the main character being some sort of writer, which they never bring up again.
Right.
And it's just really, it's a lot of elements that don't ever come together for anything.
Yeah, and they drop they drop the ball on all of them somehow.
Yeah.
And then you waste so much time on the boat before you actually get to Manhattan, and then you get to Manhattan and there's this weird like, oh yeah, we pulled the lifeboat into the port and we're just going to get like mugged by like drug addicts. It's just so all over the place that I was just like, I can't do this. I have no interest in this movie. It doesn't even feel like a Friday the 13th movie.
It really doesn't. Yeah, because he does a lot of peering through doorways, like carefully opening doorways on the boat and like leaning out.
A lot of, like...
It's really strange. As we talked about on the show, Jason on a boat is a better idea on paper than I think it is in practice, at least in this practice anyway. All right, what's your next spot?
You will be unsurprised to hear that it's number 5.
Number 5. Okay. I had number 3 as the second to worst for me.
Okay.
Yeah. What's your next one?
3.
Okay. Well, we could talk about both because my next one is part 5. So that works out pretty well.
All right.
Yeah, I put part 3 that low because like I was, as much as I don't like part 5, because as I said on the show, whatever they're trying to do does not work. Whatever story they're trying to tell, whatever way they're trying to like red herring you into revealing who the killer is.
Yeah.
It's like part 5 is oddly kind of feels like they're trying to blend the Pamela Voorhees and Jason stuff by turning it back into a whodunit.
Yeah.
And it just does not work.
Yeah, but so like, I mean, that's why I put 5 as my second least favorite.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like we were saying with 5, the characters are so miserable.
Yeah.
The sort of effort to kind of like trick you into maybe thinking that Tommy has become the killer just makes Tommy such like a non-entity as a character. Like, he has no personality other than he's totally silent, and then sometimes he freaks out for no reason.
And does like judo moves on people.
Yeah, or like runs away. It's really weird, but it just makes it so like he's kind of supposed to be the hero, and I feel like it wastes all the affection that the audience might have had for him as the child murderer
Yes.
slash survivor who beat Jason in
Yeah.
the earlier movie.
It's another one where I think we were both like, there's a good story in here somewhere.
Right, but
They
it's
just didn't tell it.
buried very deeply.
Yeah.
Um,
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to kind of move on to 3, but if you have something else with 5.
Well, I was going to say the reason that I ranked it higher than 3 for me is, while I agree with everything you said, 3's so boring. And like, I don't find a lot of rewatch value in 3, whereas 5 at least is fucking nuts. Like, it is a crazy ass movie. It's like, it is the most unpleasant in like the real grindhouse kind of way that these movies never quite got. Like, this is the one that's got women just pulling their shirts open and shaking their tits in the camera, which they always kind of like try to not explicitly do that in these ones, but this one they just do. Exactly. They want to. Yeah. And there's, you know, I think the breasts overall are bigger in this movie than they are in the other ones. Like, and they're just on display.
Well, because now you've gotten into 80s, like firmly into 80s breasts and more away from the 70s breasts.
Right. Yeah. Right. And you've got the guy doing cocaine in the car.
Oh, I forgot about that.
You know, and you've got the greaser guys yelling at each other. The movie starts with this mentally handicapped kid eating a chocolate candy bar who gets brutally murdered by someone who lives with him at the halfway house.
Yeah,
who is suicide from Return of the Living Dead, which is fun.
Yes, which is fun.
And it's just so over the top and insane. The reveal of who Roy is so insane. It's
it's not like, I feel like this movie is not over the top enough for me to have enjoyed it at all.
Sure,
like
that's fair.
It's over the top in that it goes really hard into each thing it thinks up, but then just drops them kind of when it doesn't feel like doing it anymore. And yeah, I think Roy as Jason is just like completely, I don't know, it's like kind of a cop out. It feels really unconvincing to me. Like, Roy's not a big dude. I'm kind of surprised that he does such a great job of like straight up murdering everybody nonstop, and while also nobody noticing that he's just a guy. Like,
yeah, and it brings up way too many questions. Like, once they reveal who it is, you're like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Where did he get all of this stuff? Where did he get this Tom Savini headpiece that he's wearing?
Yeah, so I struggled a little bit with whether to put 5 in this spot or 3. The reason I kept 3 above it is because 3 is where Jason gets his hockey mask. And I do think that sort of iconic origin of the mask and all of that, I think it counts for something, even if the rest of the movie is deeply boring.
Yeah, I would say the number one thing I would say as to why I would rank 5 higher than 3 is I feel like I can have a better conversation about 5 than I could about 3. Because there's so much stuff to talk about, even if it's not good stuff.
Yeah.
3 is, for me, just, there's, like we said before, there's that opening sequence that is just a slog. The characters are not super interesting, but I do agree. It is where he gets the hockey mask, so that does count for something.
Yeah.
What's your next spot?
So we've got, for me, 8, 5, 3, and then 6.
I also have 6 in that position.
Oh.
Yeah. I think this is where it's going to get kind of controversial because number 6 is highly regarded generally as one of the better ones. And
oh, really?
I don't really care for it that much.
So I struggled because I actually enjoyed 6.
Yeah.
When we watched it, I thought it was fun. 6 is for me what you were just saying about 5.
Sure.
Where you were talking about things being crazy and over the top and all of this stuff. Like, that's, for me, that's 6. I would rather talk about 6 and like enjoy the ridiculousness of part 6, because it is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's got your favorite girl, Megan.
Yeah. The thing with part 6 and why part 6, the tone shift is too much for me. It swings so far in either direction, and part 5, oddly enough, like I actually considered putting part 5 higher than part 6.
Oh, really?
And I think one of the reasons is, despite all of the ridiculousness and not greatness of it, its tone is pretty consistent. Like, it's consistently whacked and weird.
Its tone is consistently bad.
Yeah, sure. It's still consistent. It's still consistency.
But do you think that maybe part of what, like I know we've talked before, and like tonally 6 is just like too wacky and off the wall and silly for you. I wonder if part of that is because it comes right after 5, and 5 is such a downer.
It's possible, yeah.
That it's like it's so down there, like in terms of tone and content and,
yeah,
all of that I think it kind of puts the ridiculousness of part 6 into sharp relief.
Yeah. I actually, going into this rewatch, I was not expecting to think much of part 5, and I would still argue that I don't think much of part 5, but
love
like,
it. It's your favorite.
Well, you got me. But like, as far as when I was thinking about which of these what are the ones that I enjoy watching the most and would rewatch, part 5 kept creeping up a little bit, just because it's like, it's so strange. Part 6, I think part 6 is like half of a really good movie. It swings too far. Really good Friday the 13th movie, excuse me. It swings too far into the silliness.
That's a very important qualifier.
Yes, very important distinction. It swings too far in the silliness, but I do think the stuff that is more serious, I think works really well. Like you said, Megan, I think she's a great character. I think Tommy is kind of a wet blanket, but
he's such an improvement over
he's way
how he was.
Huge improvement over part 5. That's the biggest thing kicking this above part 5 is Tommy is not just garbage in this one.
Yeah.
And the end sequence is really good. Like the end sequence in the where he drags him onto the water. It's I feel like it's the first one that really feels like Jason might get the guy. Because it's always it always comes, aside from part 2. Part 2 feels that way too, but a lot of them feel like he never really gets close enough to get his hands on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's always like you're kind of crawling away, and then you hit him with an anvil or something.
Right. You hide behind the door and you hit him with a shovel.
Yeah. And in this one, in order to do the plan, Tommy has to get his hands on Jason. They have to be very close. Yeah. He has to put himself in a situation where if he screws this up, he is fucking dead. And he's got the chain, the rock, the fight, the lake's on fire. It's a really cool visual. I think the ending is great.
It's a great set. Like, it's a great set piece.
Do you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah.
All right. What's your next spot?
Sure. So I actually struggled with putting this one where it is, because I almost put 6 above this one. But my next one is part 7.
Ooh, interesting. My next one is part 4.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Kyle, but part 4. Well, we'll talk about part 4 when we get to when you hit part 4.
Well,
is it your next one?
It's my next one. So
okay.
Here we go.
Yeah, part 4. I don't know. It just, like, I understand why everybody loves it. But something about it just doesn't land with me as much as the ones that I have higher. And I was trying, when it comes down to the final 3 that are above it, that I have listed above it, I was like, yeah, these all have stuff that I really like in it. And part 4 is like, it's a good Friday the 13th movie. It hits all the beats, but I don't know. I would argue, if I'm going to be generous, I would argue that it probably has the best version of non-supernatural hockey mask Jason. Like, I think part 4 Jason is similar to like part 3 Freddy Krueger, where it's like, okay, we figured out what this guy's going to be like now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in this series, they immediately kill him off, and then everything goes to hell. Right. Not literally. That happens in part 9. But yeah, I don't know. I understand it. I get it.
Yeah.
Crispin Glover's fun.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, I remember really liking the teens.
yeah. Mhm.
Like, I enjoyed the friend group and the relationships between some of them. Like, they felt more like they actually were friends for real
Yeah.
reasons or actually knew each other. And yeah, like Kid Tommy just does it for me. Like he's like there's a lot of like, you know, you get invested really easily when there's like an 8-year-old kid at risk.
Mhm.
And I think that like, I mean, Corey Feldman's like the best actor in this series.
Yeah.
Like,
I think it's an act off between him and Crispin Glover in this movie.
yes. Yeah.
Corey Feldman's probably the best straight actor, but
Yes.
Crispin Glover is the only person in any of these movies who is making choices, and he is making choices.
Big choice.
It's like Corey Feldman, Crispin Glover, Crazy Ralph as like the guys who are the best actors in this series.
Yeah, so I don't know. For me, four is like good. It's a solid movie in this series. I feel like there's real stakes. I feel like there's some real tension. And it doesn't veer so far out of the like kind of traditional Friday the 13th setup that it's like impossible to kind of rate them next to each other. 7, I gave 7 my number 4 slot just because telekinetic Tina. I mean, what else do you need? The weird, the Carrie ripoff.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing that I do really like about part 4 is I think it probably has some of the best overall group of teens. Because as when we talked about the episode, we were talking about how it's nice that they all kind of have little story arcs that sort of they go through, and unfortunately, the climax of the story is them getting brutally murdered. I think the big thing that takes it down a peg or a couple pegs for me is it Tina? Who's the girl in that one?
I think so. Yes.
No, it's Trish.
Trish.
I don't like Trish. I think all the stuff with Trish like there's this whole side plot where she meets this hunky guy who's looking for his sister who was murdered in part 2, which by the timeline of these movies is like 6 days ago. To the point where he might not even realize she's dead yet, or I don't know, whatever.
No, he knows she's dead. He's there looking for Jason to avenge her.
Right.
Her death. Yeah.
Yeah, and it takes her out of the plot for an extended period of time.
Yeah, but
and the thing
the
that
really needs her.
No, it doesn't, and which is why I don't like her, because I think she's kind of superfluous. And that's the thing that I like the least about these movies is when they fall into this trap of we remove the final girl from the situation to the point where she doesn't even really have any idea that anything is happening at all until like the last 15 minutes of the movie. And that always bums me out because it's like, you know, what the hell are you following this character for if they're just off doing something else? Like in part 2,
I was going to say part 2 kind of does that.
They do, but Ginny spends the time talking about Jason. So she's like, she's still involved in kind of what's going on, even if not I mean, I guess technically you could say Trish does the same thing, but it's like,
I don't like Trish.
I don't.
It's fine. I don't like her either.
Yeah. So part 4 was your number 3?
Yes.
My number 3 is part 1.
Explain yourself, sir.
I will when we get to your ranking of part 1. What is your number 2 spot?
Number 2.
Also my number 2 spot. Yes.
Yes, for the aforementioned Ginny's child psychology, Pamela Voorhees' mummified head. I
went back and forth quite a bit over what my 1 and 2 spot were going to be. And we may as well talk about it now because I have a feeling I know what your number 1 spot's going to be because it's the only one left. Yep. My number 1 spot is part 7.
You are insane.
Yeah, I know. And well, that's why I had to make sure that we were doing this by favorite and not by best, because Part 7 is not a quote-unquote great movie.
No.
However, I find it to be the most fun of these movies to watch. And I've probably watched it more than the other ones. And I keep coming back to it thinking... Sorry.
No, I agree. Can we just pin that one up there?
Meredith is booing me out of the building right now.
Yeah.
As I said in our coverage, Part 7, it's never a dull moment. There's something happening through the whole movie. It's got a whacked out opening, and then once you get into it, see, I told you this was going to be divisive. It's got my favorite Jason in it. It's got my favorite it's got my favorite asshole character in it. Is
that her dead abusive dad?
Yeah, it's got her dead abusive dad in it, which is a mind-busting plot line.
So you heard it here first, folks. Clay is for child abuse.
If it leads to telekinetic vanquishing of a demon, sure.
Okay.
It's got a house explosion like you will not see
True.
in any other movie.
True.
It's got a telekinetic girl throwing televisions with her mind at Jason Voorhees. I don't know. It's just, I am under no illusions that Part 1, which I assume is your number 1, obviously.
Yes.
Is the better movie. It is the classic. It is the best. I totally agree with that. But if we're going as to what are our favorites and which ones that I go back to more often, it's Part 7.
I mean, so I like I said, Part 7 was number 4 for me, which is I think a respectable spot on this list of 8 movies.
I understand my credibility is on its way out the window if it's not already on.
It's
yeah.
gone.
We probably have lost patrons at this point.
Everyone's like cancel. No, 7 is fun. 7 is like fun and entertaining and whacked out like no other. But I think part of my problem is that like at heart I am kind of a traditionalist with these kinds of movies.
Sure.
And as much as I don't want them to be exactly the same, I do want them to feel like a Friday the 13th movie.
Sure.
And throwing in like this one happens in a world where telekinesis is just a thing that everybody's very willing and ready to accept is like, okay.
You're in grad school. The doctor's writing a paper. He's doing research. This should be right up your alley.
Yeah, it's just like I said, it's fun, but it just doesn't like when I think Friday the 13th, I don't know. I'm not thinking like a showdown between Budget Carey and
that's totally fair. I totally understand
Jason.
that.
Whereas I think the first one is just it's a classic for a reason. It defined the genre in so many ways. It's still a fun and actually scary at times movie.
Yeah.
Which like we were saying, so many of these are not. They're just not scary. They can be entertaining or silly or boring or ridiculous. But very, very few of them are actually scary and have scary moments. And I think one still wins the day with that.
Yeah.
And
Meredith
the twist is really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Meredith says, yeah, I don't like anyone but Jason having powers. Totally understandable.
I agree.
We've talked about it before, how there is a bit of a rule, I think, that a lot of people go by, which is you get one thing that's weird in your world that you build when you're writing something, where it's like you can have a world where there's an amusement park that have dinosaurs in it, but one of the people in the cast can't also be a werewolf. Because
right.
then the credibility, the believability, it just completely explodes.
Yes.
And I would argue, in defense of Part 7, with this in mind, if this were Part 1, 100% absolutely would not fly. However, since we are well into the idea that supernatural stuff is happening, he's kind of a zombie, he's kind of not, anything seems to go, I'm willing to go, sure, why not have a person with telekinesis in it? I don't think it makes any sense as much as you don't think it makes any sense. But I do think it makes for a fun movie. It makes for a fun 7th movie, let's put it that way. It is the best 4, 5, 6, 7. I would argue it's the best 7th movie I've ever seen.
Did you just count because of Star Wars?
I did.
Knew
Cheesy
it.
Living asked, "Is seven best Friday movie or best movie?" It's my favorite. It's not the best. I would agree. That part one, the original, is the best.
Okay. All right. You've gotten some of your credibility back. Just a
Yeah.
small little sliver of it.
It's interesting. I find these movies, these slasher movies, just to kind of wrap it up. Now that I've completely embarrassed myself.
Hey, look, I'm never gonna live the most sensuous serial killer comment down, or sensual serial killer. That's gonna be with me forever. So now you're down on my level.
No, I am fully owning my position here, and I will defend it as long as I have to.
Should I get you like one of those big foam fingers, except instead of saying number 1, it says number 7?
Yeah, I want another shirt like this that just says, "Ask me why Part 7 is the best one."
Part 7 is the best Friday the 13th movie. Change my mind.
Exactly. Yes, I want to see that. I want to see that meme. Yeah, what's really fascinating about these movies is there's like, so if you're looking at the ones that kind of kicked things off a little bit here, you've got Black Christmas, which led directly to Halloween.
Yep.
Which, there's documentation that Halloween happened because of Black Christmas, which leads directly to Friday the 13th. And they are all using more or less the same formula, but they're all doing it very differently. And then obviously you go from there into Nightmare on Elm Street and blah, blah, blah. The best ones seem to be able to take this formula and just do something new without really changing anything. It's really interesting, because if you look at the difference between Black Christmas, Halloween, and Friday the 13th, it's just kind of location, really.
Yeah, there are like some other tweaks to it, but yeah, the basis is the same. It's like one or more young people, preferably women, serial killer.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. With some sort of interesting, legendary sort of backstory, whether it's a urban legendy backstory.
Yeah.
And I think the movies that come after this, like Prowler or My Bloody Valentine or The Burning and stuff like that, they're all very in the similar vein, where it's kind of like taking whatever the urban legend was when you grew up and turning that into a killer, which, I mean, it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, Friday the 13th takes it from, you go from Black Christmas, which is inside a place of safety, which is a sorority house.
Yep.
But which is one that is not universally understandable. Like, not everybody was in a frat, not everybody was in a sorority, not everybody went to college.
Right.
Halloween takes the same concept and puts it directly into something that is pretty much universal, at least in this country.
Yeah.
As far as like a suburban town. And Friday the 13th moves it again into a summer camp situation where you're taking all of the you're taking away the suburban aspect of it, but you're really focusing in on the teenager aspect of it. Because in Halloween, the teens are there. They're the ones being preyed upon, but there's a lot of other environmental stuff going on, like the dad's a sheriff and all that kind of shit. Like, the parents are there. This one, you're stripping away any of the people who can come help.
Right.
And it's isolated.
I was just going to say, you're also like progressively getting more geographically remote as you go through these movies. Yep. Like, Black Christmas is a big shared house with a lot of different college girls living there, and the house mom, and parents are coming and going, and there are neighbors and other frats, and the campus is right there, and they're in the middle of town. They've got, lots of people around. And then Halloween is a more traditional American suburb where you've got these big single family houses, big lawns, like kind of sprawling neighborhoods where you have a neighbor, but they're, far enough away that if somebody's screaming inside your house, they might not hear you, but they might see you. They're going to see you run out onto your lawn. And then you get to the Friday the 13th movies and you're just out in the woods.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta hitch a ride for 2 miles to get to the camp from town, and town is tiny.
No phone.
Yep.
The cops, one cop comes out. Yeah, the cops are in it. One cop shows up and he's like, "You guys got to be careful," and then he never shows up again. Yeah, I think the evolution of it as a genre, and then if you move into Nightmare on Elm Street, again, you change the setting by putting it somewhere even more where you're even more vulnerable, which is in your head while you're sleeping.
Right.
And so it's and then when you get to say like Scream, it's kind of come back around where you're back into suburban life, but it's, instead of it being a unkillable monster that you can't wrap your head around, it's the person who's sitting next to you.
Right. And Scream is kind of purposely, I think, brings it back into that environment. Right. It's a commentary on so many movies that have come before. So.
Right. Yeah. Cheesy Libs here says, after the Cabin in the Woods movie, not sure where the genre can go now. Do you think there's still room for this kind of traditional slasher? Because we've talked about it a little bit on the show, where if they were to do another remake, would you want it to be modern or period? And if you look at, say, the Fear Street movies on Netflix or American Horror Story 1984, anybody who's really dipping back into this is doing it as a period piece. Do you think that there's room? And I guess we'll find out, because we got Halloween coming out this year, another Halloween movie.
Yeah.
Scream 5 is coming out pretty soon.
Yeah.
Those are both modern movies. Do you think there's room for this traditional kind of genre? Or do you have any thoughts on what the next version of it might be?
Well, I think that so long as like we have changing technology, we have more room for like scary movies and slasher movies and all of that. Like, I haven't seen the one that came out during the pandemic where everybody's on Zoom.
Oh, Host. We will, because it is on our list. If this is your first time listening or watching us, we cover movies off of the Rotten Tomatoes 200 best horror movies of all time list, and 2020's Host is very high on that list, so we will get there eventually.
Right, but so I think like there are going to be more movies like that are taking things in our more modern world and fitting them into these kind of genre movies. I think there's room for it. I think there's always going to be like new versions, and maybe they'll get further away from the sort of slasher trope, and maybe they'll come back to it, and like,
yeah.
I mean, just think of the concept of ride shares alone, like Uber and Lyft, is the most terrifying thing.
Oh yeah, they've never really done a ride share horror movie, have they?
I'm sure someone has, but I don't know if there's been a good one yet.
I will say, the one of those that I did anticipate was a couple years ago. I was like, how come nobody's done an escape room movie yet?
Oh God.
And then like maybe 6 months later, they announced they were coming out. Blumhouse was doing an escape room horror movie. And it's like, oh, well, there you go. No new ideas. Yeah, I am. I'm very much. Oh, this is okay. Interesting here. What if the franchise goes in a Christopher Nolan direction, is more realistic, say, about Jason's mother? I wonder what that would mean. If that would mean like, what would more? I mean, she's fairly realistic in the movie. Well, I mean, I don't really know what a realistic version of that would be. But Meredith says, I think that or just a back to basics slasher movie could work well in being non-gimmicky. It may feel retro. Yeah, I'm groaning in my mind, picturing Jason, instead of pulling the phone line out of the wall, he like knocks over a cell tower or something. Like,
could you see like there being some setting where it's like, no, we're here at this retreat at this camp because like kids are all addicted to technology and their phones. So this is going to be a technology-free camp where we get back to basics. You know what I mean? Like, I could see something like that working.
I could, but I think the thing, oddly enough, that makes Friday the 13th work so well is, since it's a summer camp, and I think this kind of goes for Halloween as well. Despite the fact that visually they are both very of the era that they were made, the concepts are pretty timeless. So, kids are always going to be at summer camp. Suburbs always exist. They're kind of universal things. Whereas if like you start bringing into, for instance, in 2018 Halloween, the first thing that threw me off was when the two people who start the movie are two podcasters. I was like, ugh, okay, all right, I'll roll with this. But it like immediately dates it. And
yeah, but I think podcasting is something that we're currently doing.
That's true.
But it's also very specific.
I'm a self-hating podcaster.
Yeah. A healthy dose of self-loathing. But it's like very specific, whereas like you could say like, oh, kids have been spending too much time looking at screens. Like parents have been saying that since like the 80s when like TV became a bigger part of, like you had home VHS tapes and, as soon as that kind of thing started happening. And I think it's going to just continue to become a problem or a concern, if not a problem, in a way that's going to at least give it some longevity if you keep it vague enough.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I still think there's more you can do with the camp. Like we talked in one of the other episodes where I had this idea that if you put a camp on Crystal Lake with more malicious intent, like one of those rehabilitation camps where people send their kids to scare them straight or corporal punish them into line, then Jason becomes this sort of like avenging angel of the children killing the campers. I think there's ways around it. Where you go in the genre from this point, just in general, though, is, I'm not sure. I think it's probably with these movies. I don't know if I want more modern, but I do see what you're saying. Where it's like I think if you treat it as the camp, though in modern times, is sort of like you're taking people back by getting rid of their technology and stuff, and that's part of the point. I think that would work. That could work pretty well. Yeah,
I'm not advocating for that as some sort of like awesome idea. I more just mean that like there's room. There's room to continue making movies like this. Like I think there's narrative ways you can kind of like, scoot your way around the modern problems of the internet and smartphones.
Yeah. Cheesy Libs mentions that the movie Spree has an Uber driver killing passengers to boost his live stream. Worth a watch.
Oh.
Meredith is informing us that according to her students, it's par for the course to have phones taken while they're at camp, so that would work and not even have to be a major plot point. All right, well there you go.
Interesting. I would not have guessed that.
Just to finalize it here, after 8 movies, how do you feel? Are you excited to do the back 4, or are you what's your thoughts at this point?
Well, so I'm excited for Freddy vs. Jason.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've heard enough from you, Clay, from some of our listeners, from some other folks that it's like an interesting, like it's doing something different and it's got some things to recommend it.
Yeah.
The other ones I'm a little like, I'm hoping they're so bad they're good. Do you know what I mean? Like they're so bad they're fun to watch. Like I'm hoping for that. I'm just hoping they're not all like part 8.
Yeah.
That's what I'm a little scared of. I'm a little scared I'm in for like 3 to 4 more part 8s.
Yeah. I am so excited to talk about Jason Goes to Hell.
Ooh.
I am less excited to talk about Jason X, which is a movie I've never actually watched all the way through.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because it is... we'll get there.
Plenty of time for that later.
Yeah, that's the only one I'm kind of dreading is Jason X. And I know that people like that one because of how silly it is, but I think that one's too silly for me, but we'll see when we get there. I maintain my love of part 7, so I'm going to put up this one more time before we go.
It's so appropriate.
But thank you guys so much for joining us on this Friday the 13th. This was a lot of fun. If you'd like to listen to our continuing coverage of the Friday the 13th series, you can do that by supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/thepenskyfile. Or If you just want to listen to us talk about horror movies, you can do that every other week on the Rotten Horror Picture Show. Every other Wednesday, we have a new episode coming out. And the next episode we have coming out is, I believe, An American Werewolf in London. And then after that, we will be doing The Invitation.
Oh, that's
and
right.
we've already covered it. We've done 40 movies up to this point. We're covering lots of stuff. We covered Poltergeist. We covered Scream. We covered Cabin in the Woods. We covered A Girl Who Walks Home Alone at Night. We covered Ken Russell's The Devils. We're doing it all.
Yep, we're all over the horror movie map.
Yes.
Like a lot.
So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Amanda, for joining me on this continuing silly ride into Camp Crystal Lake.
Thank you, Clay.
And we will see you guys next time.
Bye, everyone.